Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the fourth in the series of conversations with families who are affected by eosinophilic esophagitis. I'm Kim Alexander. I am the executive director and founder of AJ's Fight. We are a nonprofit organization that's based out of Houston, Texas. We support research and community development and education in eosinophilic esophagitis. Tonight, I am happy to have with us Amy, Neumann, and Weston. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to kind of just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and your family and its uniqueness.
I have 3 kids. So I have, my oldest is Kaylin, and she just turned 18 years old. So Kaylin has eosinophilic esophagitis, as well as postural orthostatic tachycardia. And she also deals with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And it looks like probably some mast cell issues as well. That's probably the next diagnosis we're heading to. My middle daughter does not have any eosinophilic disease diagnosed and no symptoms. So we're keeping our fingers crossed there. And then Weston is 12 years old, almost 13. He has had issues since about 1 year old, but he finally got a diagnosis about 4 years ago of eosinophilic esophagitis. And just 2 years ago, we also received eosinophilic gastritis diagnosis.
So we've talked a lot about eosinophilic esophagitis, and that for the most part is the foundation's focus. Tell us what eosinophilic gastritis is.
So eosinophilic gastritis means that the eosinophils are gathered inside the stomach. So he doesn't have them any lower than the stomach, but trying to treat inside the stomach is more difficult. It's more difficult to get medications. The medications for E.O.E tend to work a lot of the time, like steroids work almost topical medication.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more difficult to get medication down to the stomach to work the same way. So his symptoms are more stomach based than anything. We don't really notice. More recently, we've noticed the swallowing problems, and that's new, but the stomach problems are much more severe than what we deal with simply the E.O.E. So, and it tends to be more immediate after eating foods than what we deal with the E.O.E. symptoms.
Okay. So Weston, it sounds like it took a long time for the doctors to kind of figure out what was going on with you. What was that like for you?
It was definitely frustrating, them not knowing what was wrong with me.
Can you speak up just a little bit for me, honey?
It was definitely harder because they didn't know what was wrong and my stomach would hurt, and I had no explanation for that. So it was definitely a very hard situation.
He missed
I know that you're really active, right? I see you all the time on Facebook playing baseball. So you like to run around and move around. Did your symptoms make it hard to do that?
Yeah, I had to skip class, sports, practices. My stomach was hurting. My throat, I didn't feel well. That was about it.
We noticed that his EG tends to be very seasonal. So we struggle every single year during basketball season. So we start basketball in November, and we get a few weeks in, and then we start to see symptoms. And we struggle to get through basketball season that ends in February. So.
And have the doctors said that there's any association with pollen and fall and the changes in the season related to his symptoms?
They're having a harder time explaining that with the EG. Because the E.O.E, they have kind of explained that with the kids, but it's more of like an inhaled, swallowed thing, and they kind of see it kind of going this far and that's it, and stopping. So they really, when we ask those questions, we don't get a lot of direction when it comes to the EG. They just don't have enough information yet.
Okay. So what medications is he on?
He is on swallowed budesonide, but it's not like the budesonide that we use for E.O.E or asthma. It's actually Entacort, which is typically used for Crohn's disease. So
Okay.
we open up the capsule, we crush it, and then put it in applesauce, and he has to swallow that with applesauce. And so that actually activates in the stomach rather than further down. So that is just for the EG. And then we deal with the Prilosec for acid reflux, and swallowed Flovent to deal with the eosinophilic esophagitis.
So you guys are the first family that we've talked to that actually has 2 children in the household that has eosinophilic gastrointestinal disease. And so what is that like for you?
There were things about it that were easier, because the second time around, you kind of know what to look for.
Okay.
And it didn't make diagnosis any faster or easier though. So although like I knew in my heart something was wrong and I felt like something was wrong, we struggled because you knew something was wrong and you couldn't medically prove it. And so there was that part of it that was there was the good and bad to it. The kids do deal with different triggers. So mealtime and that it can be complicated. You know, we have 5 different kinds of milk in the refrigerator on a regular basis. My middle daughter is the only one that has anaphylactic allergies. And so she is the only one that we have to worry about anaphylaxis, but that does kind of complicate things as well.
Okay. So you said that you have 5 different milks in the refrigerator for the family. What is it like with grocery shopping? What is it like to kind of keep track of it all?
It's difficult. Now that the kids are all older, it's much easier because they check their ingredients. They double check their ingredients. They've learned to check, even though I've checked it in the middle of the store, they check it when we get home. And they check it before they eat something new or even something that they're familiar with. It's confusing. You think you've got it all down with one kid, and then you realize like Weston started to react to some different things. And then you're trying to figure it out and trying to find safe foods. And we don't live in a big city. So, you know, to find things like oat milk or some of the other specialty foods is not always easy. And some of the time that's a 2 to 3 hour drive to get those specialty foods.
Where do you live? Because I think that that's significant as well. You live in a pretty isolated area, right?
Yeah, we're in Sidney, Nebraska, which is the western side of Nebraska. So we're only about 3 hours north of Denver, but we're in a city of 6,000 and we're the biggest city in our area. So Walmart is our biggest option for shopping. So, which is not always great with allergy specific foods. So if Walmart doesn't have it, it may take a 2 or 3 hour drive to Denver.
So I know both of your children, both Kaylin and Weston, are really active in sports and school, and they travel to play their sports. How do you manage their specialty foods while you guys are always on the go?
We pack everything, and we are lucky enough that the kids do have some of the top 8 foods. So we can do wheat with both kids. So that does make our lives a lot easier, even with fast food. We have learned sometimes things like McDonald's are easy because they're consistent, and we can get consistent ingredients. We can get updated ingredients from them fairly consistently. So some of the time traveling, you know, when we're going into Cheyenne, Wyoming or Denver, it's not so bad. But when we're going to a more rural place, we can't stop at Joe's restaurant, you know, and some of the cities we're going to, that's the only option, some small town restaurants and stuff. So we pack all of our foods. We make sure that we've got a cooler just about everywhere we go. And the kids have gotten pretty good about, you know, carrying their granola bars or whatever else in their backpack. Because if their sports run long or anything else, it's not just a simple fix. It's not just stepping into, you know, a fast food or a local restaurant to grab something.
Right. So Weston, how does it feel to be a little bit different than your teammates and your classmates? How do you manage that?
It doesn't really feel that different.
Okay.
Other than taking medication in the morning and at night. That's all really.
So your kids, your classmates or teammates, they don't ask you why you eat differently? Do they
No.
kind of know? Do you explain it?
They've asked before. They really haven't asked again. But
Okay.
they don't really comment on that kind of stuff, like eating.
Okay. So we know Weston is kind of pinch hitting tonight. Originally, we were supposed to talk to Kaylin just about her EOE and her comorbidities or the other things that she has going on. And we kind of screwed the schedule up a little bit. So Kaylin is just turned 18 and she's graduated from high school and she is transitioning now to higher education. I understand she wants to be a nurse.
Yes.
And so I know for me with AJ, I tell him all the time, and I've been saying it for years, I have, 8 years, 7 years, and now I'm down to 3. I have 3 years to get you as invested as I am in your health. Tell me what that feels like, because now she's 18 and technically can make some of these decisions on her own and even decisions of compliance, right? She can say to heck with it, I don't want to do any of this stuff anymore. What are you feeling in this moment?
It's a little overwhelming. So I feel like we finally gotten to a good place because I did feel like I was on a timeline. Like you said, like counting down, like, okay, we have 5 years, we have 4 years, I did feel like we were on that timeline and we finally gotten to a place where because of some of her comorbidities, she got so sick that I had to manage every little aspect of her life for a time there, that she's kind of seen the worst. But she was one of those kids that definitely had to see rock bottom with her health before she would get invested. It was kind of something she didn't want to deal with. It was mom dealt with things. And so we finally gotten to a point where she is more invested. And if it's something that she's not sure about, that she just trusts what I'm doing and that where I'm coming from. And then she'll ask me, okay, why? And
Okay.
As she's starting to take her nursing classes and stuff, she's starting to see the why. As she's starting anatomy and she's starting her CNA classes and that, she's really starting to see, okay, mom wasn't crazy.
Right.
Mom was doing the research on this stuff, and that's why, them taking the medication and everything was so important. But some of it, I've managed their prescriptions on, we use Walmart for our pharmacy. So I manage our prescriptions on our Walmart app, and now I don't have access to hers as of last week. So it's those small things, making sure that she has allowed access, and some of it she's capable of reordering her prescriptions and stuff. She knows how to do that stuff. But when I'm picking up prescriptions for 3 people, it makes sense for me to do it. So some of it is simple stuff like that. That you really don't think about, but as soon as they turn 18, you lose access to their pharmacy records and that stuff. And then
Right.
trying to transition into the hospital systems too, where she can finally log in and see her own records and communicate with doctors. And what that will look like for me, will that cut off any conversation between me and the doctors? We're kind of starting to work through all of that stuff right now.
Yeah, and I mean, you bring up really good points because they're capable of it, right? Even AJ at 15, he's capable of calling and getting the medication he's taken every day for the last 15 years. But it's kind of like, okay, they're capable of it, but when we start talking about prior authorizations or making sure they got the right amount or something going wrong, it's all of those checks and balances. And we're not in situations, at least not most of us, where it's a guardianship thing, where we need to go to a courthouse and get that stuff. But there is still a certain amount of mommy in the mix that needs to happen. So has Kaylin been open about just allowing you to continue to try to help her navigate those things?
She has been. She really has been. But like I said, as she's gotten closer to 18, she's also been more invested in that, which is, I worried about that the last 5 years because she wasn't before now.
Right.
Before the last year, she really was not invested. And now she's actually going, okay, this is the medication I need, you know, and she's had some control over some of the other medications, whether she took them or not.
Okay.
And so she was able to say, like, my symptoms are improving. We need to call the doctor and ask him, like, can I get off this medication?
Right.
You know, and then we need to take it off the pharmacy list and that stuff, because she's starting to see the importance of those things. And part of it even though she's capable, most 18-year-olds don't have to do a lot of this stuff. And I feel like some things, when it's really not much effort on my part, if I'm picking up for, you know, prescriptions for 3 of us, why not take it off of the plate?
Right. Exactly.
Because it's easy for me. And it wouldn't.
So, I mean, it's really good to hear that she is more invested, because I remember the day we met. We were at an AppFed conference, and you and I were both sitting at the door. We were volunteering as people were going into a mixer. And I don't remember what we were talking about, but the place we clicked was, oh, your kid's not compliant. Oh, my kid's not compliant. Like, that was the thing we clicked on, and it sparked our conversation. I was like, yeah, AJ's not compliant. You know, he's, and it was like, at that point, we started saying that our children were kindred spirits because they just wouldn't go with it. So you keep referencing her comorbidities and what happened a year ago. Tell us what happened.
So it was March previous to the pandemic. So it's been a full 2 years now.
Okay.
She got sick with a cold, and just minor cold that you would still send him to school with, kind of thing. Really, like, little bit of a runny nose. That was it. Nothing to worry about. And was feeling like she had a headache the next day, stayed home, and that night she started passing out. And it happened that first day. Then it happened the next day. And I kind of had sat through some of the comorbidity sessions during AppFed conferences. So I had learned about POTS, and I had learned about a couple of other things. And I kind of went like, I wonder if this is what we're looking at. We had seen so many of the teenagers that came up with POTS symptoms.
Tell us what POTS is, since you're using the acronym.
Postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Okay. So essentially, when she stood up, it's postural tachycardia. So she would stand up, and all the things that happen in your autonomic nervous system, all the things that happen automatically when you stand to allow the blood back to the brain, were not happening properly. So her heart and her brain were trying to communicate and fix it, and so it would speed her heart rate up to just crazy numbers just at standing. And then she started to have symptoms, even just sitting up, she would have symptoms, and her heart rate was high all the time. Her resting heart rate would be 130, laying in bed. And then
tell us what's normal.
I'm not even sure what's normal anymore, because
60 to 100.
Yeah, so 60 to 100 is normal. And that's one of the things that we watch with Weston, and we have had symptoms. After a couple baseball games, he has gone down twice now, and passed out.
We got to keep you acting right.
Yes. So with Kaylin, it kind of snowballed. We went through, we were lucky enough to walk into an ER in our small town and say, I think maybe it's POTS. And they said, we don't know what POTS is, but we're going to go Google that.
Right.
And they did. And we were lucky that we had somebody that didn't know, because they were willing to look it up, and they were willing to do the test immediately. And they said to us, we can't diagnose this. We don't know enough to diagnose this, but we think that you're probably right. And we need to get you into a cardiologist. And they did all the testing you would normally do under that situation, but then they also put us on the path for a diagnosis to POTS.
And how long did the diagnosis take to get?
So about a month. which
Okay.
for most people, it's about 6 years.
Right.
So because we walked in and had a doctor willing to listen when they didn't know anything, that really changed our trajectory of how that was treated.
Okay.
But it wasn't an easy fix. It was not a simple take this medication and it will go better kind of thing. We had to get to the point where she was taking multiple medications. She was taking salt pills 6 days or 6 times a day.
Mhm.
And then she was drinking a minimum of 100 ounces of fluid a day. So we had a kid that was non-compliant on E.O.E meds 1 time a day. And now we're adding 3 medications, salt pills 6 times a day, and you're having to count 100 ounces minimum.
Right.
So,
So it was a crash course into compliance, essentially.
yeah. And she got worse before she got better. And she got to the point where she had lost almost all of her muscle. She went from dancing 7 days a week and doing weights 5 days a week to not being able to get out of bed.
Right.
And when that affected her muscle, we started to realize that she had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So
Tell us a little bit about EDS or Ehlers-Danlos.
So it's a connective tissue disorder. And so her joints are essentially not being held together properly.
Mhm.
So she would do simple things like pick up a laundry basket and it would dislocate the shoulder.
Right.
Sometimes completely, sometimes just partially. It affects her fingers, her arms mainly, but the fingers, the hands, the wrists, she would just pop out of place. And it was a little odd, So it was one thing after another.
Right. So for AJ, it's his elbow.
Okay.
And he just comes and is just doing something really strange. And it's just like, that doesn't really look like that's the way it's supposed to be. Do you remember the first time it happened?
Oh, yeah. She picked up a laundry basket and we were so used to her passing out at this point. Like that had become normal. And you would barely get off the couch. You would go, "Are you okay?" And she would say, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just gonna lay here a minute." But when she dislocated her shoulder, Dad freaked out. Dad went into panic mode because he could visually see it.
Mhm.
So like Kaylin and I at this point were just laughing because
Right.
we knew we were probably headed towards EDS. We were seeing kind of the symptoms before this. So she and I are laughing and she's like, "It just needs popped back in." I told her, I said, "I'm not a nurse. I'm not a doctor. I'm not popping this back in. So we do need to follow your dad's instructions and go to the ER, but he is a little bit ridiculous." So yeah, and now most of the time she doesn't fully dislocate joints. It's more of a partial dislocation, so she can kind of push up against something and it pops back in. But that all came with being out of shape and her muscles. She had always been so active in sports, and her E.O.E had never prevented her from being active, and so she was so active in sports that those muscles were enough to kind of hold things together. So
I know she's gone back to dance since she's been feeling better and she's moving her body more. And I think for those of us who deal with EDS or other joint laxity issues related to the E.O.E, we're always wondering how much you can do. Because I know for AJ, his geneticist said, swimming, that's it. That nothing else. He can't do anything else. AJ really wanted to play football. And then I had to start making quality of life decisions. And we haven't, on any of these, we haven't talked about that phrase that doctors keep telling us, quality of life. But I had to start making quality of life decisions because he was really depressed about not being able to play sports and those kinds of things. And so we ended up allowing him to play football, knowing the risk. How did you get to the point where you saw her dislocations, you saw what POTS had done, and then saying, okay, you can go back to this very physical activity?
It was a slow process. She homeschooled during that year, but when COVID hit was when she was starting to get better. So
Okay.
all of a sudden, she made the dance team. She managed to get through tryouts the first week in March, and then we closed, that next week for COVID. But for her, that was a blessing in disguise, because what she started to do was, instead of going to this really intense workout straight into dance tryouts, they couldn't hold, or not tryouts, sorry, practices. They couldn't hold practices. But the seniors, she was going into her senior year, she said, let's do it ourselves. And so she was dealing with some of the freshmen coming in. They couldn't do the splits. They couldn't do these moves full out. So she was the one that said, okay, we're going to go practice, and we're going to do little at a time. And so she was that example for those girls that
Good for her.
were doing it for the first time. We were also very lucky with our sports program, and same with Weston. Our sports through the school, the dance coach works in physical therapy. And so her practices that she's doing are safe practices to start with.
Oh, good for her.
Even with our recreational, our baseball and stuff, we have coaches that are extremely experienced. And so you don't have kids overthrowing with pitching. And so some of that, it's always hard because you're trying to decide kind of what's too much and what's not, but kind of getting those kids into the right places to start with good programs. Kind of they start for us. That was our beginning point, because if you know that they're with people you would trust, typically that's your first step, and then you have to make decisions for each child.
So Weston, you've seen your sister's journey, right? And like Mom said, you have some symptoms of some of the things that she's dealt with. How does that make you feel about the future?
Definitely better than I can ask her questions if I need to about some of the stuff. She's kind of like a computer. I can just ask it questions and it will give you answers. So it definitely helps a lot having her around.
It's easy, like with the small pot symptoms, he knows now, when we're trying to do electrolytes before a big weekend, that it's not just an adult telling him basic health stuff. So he tends to listen. And I think that that's the advantage that he has over Kaylin, is that he's going into this with more information, but then a little more trust of what needs to happen. So he's more compliant for sure.
So now, Amy, in all of this, you've been a student teacher. You've been in school yourself. Tell us what that has been like. So you have 3 children at home, 2 of them rare, 1 of them anaphylactic to foods. You have a husband, you have a household, you have buku meds and 5 kinds of milk in your refrigerator. How did you manage school?
It was all a blur. I think, this is where some of the COVID stuff for a lot of people was devastating, to be stuck at home. I was already Zooming in. I had Kaylin homeschooling, so I was already Zooming into classes. So when the kids kind of, when they were stuck at home, then they kind of just popped into my schedule. We had it pretty easy when it comes to like the last year, but because we were already dealing with a rural community that was not, it wasn't uncommon to do things like Zoom. And so when I was dealing with Kaylin being homeschooled and her being so sick, I was able to do things like Zoom in the classes already. Like that was a norm. And part of that, like I said, is because we were rural to start with. So it's been a challenge, but it's been easier the older the kids are, because like I said, they are, they're checking their own foods. they know when they're out of something. They know what they can cook with, what they can cook for each other with. And everybody talks about how's it going to be when they're teenagers, and I feel like it's gotten easier. So I don't think I could have done this when they were little.
I understand. I definitely understand. All right. So last words, Weston, little boys out there dealing with EOE and EG. What do you want to tell them?
I don't really know. It's hard.
Need a minute.
Well, I think your superpower is that even though you have two things that you've been diagnosed with so far, you still managed to be a great baseball player and active, right?
Yeah,
You still have fun with your friends.
yeah, a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think that's your superpower, right?
Feel like they need to do what they love, what they enjoy a lot. Don't let it hold you back.
That's right.
Everyone else. That's about it.
And Amy, what would you share with the community?
I think it's to make sure you have a community, because the last few years, especially, that were hard. When I saw Kaylin just not be able to get out of bed, there were days that I didn't want to get out of bed at that point. And I think having a community has been absolutely essential, and to ask those questions. And like I said, it's been, some of the stuff is easier for Weston because he has somebody to ask. And when you don't, I didn't have that when Kaylin was diagnosed when she was 4 years old. You know, I had to go looking for that. And that has changed, that's changed our lives. And they understand kind of, you know, when you just want to scream. So Kira does probably have EDS as well, my middle daughter. So she's currently on crutches. So we're,
it's a whole adventure in your household, huh?
it's always something. So, but like I said, have a community and be involved in that. And because those people understand when you just need to scream, and when you need a recipe and you know nobody else understands the 5 milks. So.
Right. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Amy and Weston, for joining us and telling your story. I so appreciate you guys and look forward to seeing how your kids continue to grow. Join us tomorrow. We'll be talking with Dr. Carla Davis, who is the Chief of Allergy Immunology at Texas Children's Hospital, as well as Anthony Olive, who is the co-director of the Gastrointestinal Disease Clinic at Texas Children's Hospital and is a gastroenterologist. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you again, Amy and Weston, and you guys have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you.